A little earlier today is under administrative agenda on item 4, pages 4 and 5. It lists the Planned Santa Barbara Subcommittee as being a part of the appointment reaffirmation process, and I believe that the Commission deferred action on that particular subcommittee until after the 1st of March, because on the 1st of March the City Council had their discussions regarding Planned Santa Barbara. So I'd like to see that either taken off or some note indicated that further action on whether that committee continues to exist or not be taken up at a subsequent meeting. Mr. Cato?
Chair Joseph, we'll put in a notification saying that we deferred action on that pending a decision on how the commission will what input the commission might give.
Great. Okay, the second set of minutes were those from February 17th. Any comments, corrections, or additions to those minutes? Yes, that's what I was going to do. Why don't we entertain a motion to approve the minutes from February 3rd and 17th as amended?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. On the resolutions, why don't we start with Resolution 001-11. Any comments on that item? Seeing no one, let's move on to Resolution 002-11. Mr. Jordan.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to keep up when you're going to go back to 001.
Well, you feel free to offer comments on either.
Well, the one I'm looking at is from the February 3rd meeting, and I am perplexed. My motion that day, which was then approved by the majority of the council members, was to take the one paragraph set of findings regarding that particular appeal, strike the word apparent or apparently, and move that forward. And I asked the question about the inclusion of the word apparent or apparently, and the advice I was given was that if that gave me pause to say so, and so my motion was to strike it, and I was assured that the resolution that would be crafted would reflect that action. So now what I'm looking at in a resolution is 2 pages where the word apparent or apparently has grown to 7 times, and then it's been added with a presumably and a probably. And I'm just curious again as to if I was uncomfortable with the word apparently being used in terms of noncompliance as part of my decision 2 weeks ago, why that would have grown to such lengths in the resolution.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Commissioner Jordan, I understand your point, and I apologize. As I reviewed the draft resolution, I just kind of didn't remember the point that you had made in your motion as far as the word apparently. This particular resolution was drafted by the City Attorney's Office after reviewing the hearing 3 times, And I think that the import of your comment about the word apparently was missed in that review. At the beginning and the end of the day, this resolution needs to reflect your feelings. And so if the word apparently or probably is a problem, then let's work on those revisions. If it's as simple, I mean, and it can be as simple as removing that word and seeing if the commission agrees with the remaining intent or the meaning of the remaining language. The bottom line is this is your resolution, and we're not going to adopt it until you're comfortable with it.
Mr. Vincent or Mr. Cotto, this is an item that do I understand it correctly? It's going to City Council on appeal? And if it is, what are the time constraints of getting this resolution squared away so that it suits the pleasure of the Commission?
Chair Joseph, this has been appealed by the applicants, and it's scheduled for April 12th. There is a little bit of time still if the Commission feels you need more time to finalize this resolution.
So if we were to continue this particular item until next meeting, we could still resolve the issues that Mr. Jordan brings up and still have a timely adoption of minutes?
Yes, that would be fine. I would ask the Commission to, let's discuss all the things that need to be changed here, and then we can make the changes and then bring it back next week.
That'd be great.
Mr. Chair, so I don't want to nitpick this and rewrite this, but there are 9 of those words there, and we all can decide how far you want to go in that. But the one that stands out to me is on page 3 in item G, and that had to do with the bulk of my consideration was the inability of the applicant to show evidence that he was in business continually. And that is the rest of them I don't need to fall on the sword on, but so 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down, almost over to the right is the word probably, and I could live with just that one example of probably being taken out, and just what we said that day in my recollection was that he was not in business continuously based on the evidence provided. So if the rest of the Commission was happy with that or wanted to look at the rest of them, either way, but if it was just that one word revised, I would be happy with that.
Any other comments by my colleagues on Mr. Jordan's comment? Ms. Larson.
Mr. Chair, I agree with Mr. Jordan. You know, part of what we do here is try and make language as clear as possible and not use might, should, could, would sorts of language that would allow ambiguity or drifting in what our intention is, or so in the interest of clear communication, I support Mr. Jordan 100%.
Okay, so I would concur with that, Mr. Jordan. So would you like to?
Does that need to be a motion?
I would like to hear that as a motion.
Okay, so
separate from the other resolution.
I'd move that staff revise that resolution in paragraph G, striking the word probably, and I think you can leave the rest in there. The operation was, in fact, discontinued, so just strike the word probably, and then return the resolution to council at the next opportunity for approval.
Presuming that's a motion, do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Before the vote, I'm a little confused. The resolution would be approved. Is your motion that that the Planning Commission approves this resolution with the change as?
It has to come back again, doesn't it?
No.
No, this is your
No.
resolution.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is just a statement of the action that you
Today?
took. Yes.
Just to correct-
you can do that
correct it.
today if that's the only change you need to make.
Sort of
then-
like I did it 2 weeks ago, only we can do it better today.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So then I'm sorry. So my motion would be to approve the resolution with the striking of the word probably in paragraph G.
Okay. Ms. Lodge, did you have a comment on that?
No,
Okay.
Mr. Cotto was trying to get your attention.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
probably going to make the same point.
Okay, so a motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
I abstain.
Sorry, Mr. Bartlett. Now moving on to the next resolution, 002-11. Any changes or modifications to that resolution? Mr. Jordan, did you have, sorry. Your last one? Okay. Okay. Okay, is there a motion to adopt that resolution as written?
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And I'm abstaining from that. I wasn't there.
Abstentions? 1. Motion carries. Okay, that takes care of our administrative agenda. Mr. Kato, are there any continuances, ex-agenda items, or other modifications to our agenda today?
No, there are not.
Okay. What about announcements of and appeals?
The only announcement I think I already made, there is an appeal of the medical marijuana dispensary 2915 De La Vina. That'll be heard April 12th.
All righty. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the commission and make public comments on matters which are not on our agenda today. If there's anybody who would like to address the commission, please step forward. Seeing no one coming forward and seeing no green slips, we'll close the public portion of the general public comment and move on to our first item, which is an application by Santa Barbara County Flood Control for some maintenance activities in the Goleta Slough area.
Andrew Berman from the Airport Department will be giving the staff presentation.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair Justice and Planning Commission. The project before you is the renewal of a CDP for the operation of 2 sediment basins in the Goleta Slough. The 2 basins are at the north end of the Goleta Slough Reserve along Hollister Avenue. They're part of a larger project, which is the dredging of 5 basins in the Goleta Slough. However, these are the only 2 that are in Santa Barbara city limits. The project consists of approximately biannual dredging of the 2 sediment basins, alternating 1 per year on average, but doing it as needed. And approximately 21,000 cubic yards is the capacity of the 2 sediment basins, and that would be the maximum amount that would be removed. The purpose of the project is to avoid hazards associated with flooding in the Goleta Valley, risks to life and property, and to minimize sediment buildup in the Goleta Slough wetlands. It's also because we need to revisit this project as the existing permit expired in November. So I have some pictures now of sort of our worst case scenarios in 1969 and 1995 were the worst floods that we have record. And if you note in the March 95 picture, the red mud that has filled in all over the slough. Over the course of 6 years, we took pictures to demonstrate the effect of sedimentation on the slough. And you'll notice, I can use my cursor here, the area that had filled gradually converted by 2001 into upland habitat, which is, of course, a severe impact to the slough. Flood control has, over the course of 40 years, managed sediment and flooding impacts in the Goleta Slough. The 2 most recent changes were in 2006, the Airport Department widened the sediment basins as part of the airfield safety projects. And most recently, in November, the County Board of Supervisors approved a new environmental impact report for their annual maintenance plan. The changes that were identified in the EIR to the plan are primarily where the sediment is going. It had been available to the public, and now it will be deposited either at Goleta Beach or at the Foothill landfill, depending upon the suitability of the soil. Also, environmental conditions have changed since it was last reviewed. The tidewater goby was discovered in the Goleta Slough, which is an endangered species, and the city of Goleta has identified Hollister Avenue as a scenic road, which pertains to aesthetics impacts. So as I mentioned, the EIR was approved by the Board of Supervisors, and it identified 9 significant unavoidable or Class 1 impacts, of which 7 are likely to occur in the city of Santa Barbara, pertaining to air quality, biological resources, and aesthetics. And in order to approve this project, the Planning Commission will need to make statements of overriding consideration for those impacts. Those statements would essentially, it's an opportunity for the Planning Commission to weigh the balance of the project merits against its environmental impacts and determine whether or not such impacts are acceptable. And the recommended statement of overriding consideration is in Section 9B of the staff report, which is pages 10 and 11. Impacts to air quality pertain to the operation of the dredging equipment. There will be volatile organic compounds that would be emitted during the operation. And although mitigation measures have been incorporated to minimize that effect, the residual impact remains significant. As far as biological resources are concerned, the tidewater goby is known to exist in the sediment basins and would be potentially impacted by the dredging operation. The biological opinion issued by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service identified the sediment basins as being ideal habitat, and further pointed out that they tend to thrive in the basins in the months following the dredging. So it's kind of the establishment of goby habitat, but at the time of sediment removal, there's the potential for takings of the tidewater goby. There's also the potential, as was addressed in the previous CDP, of the fuel spill. There's mitigation measures to incorporate a spill prevention plan. However, that the possibility exists remains significant. And also now, because Hollister Avenue is identified as a scenic road, there are aesthetic impacts associated with the operation of the crane and with the truck trips either to Goleta Beach or to the Foothill landfill. No mitigations were proposed for that as screening or other measures were deemed infeasible. I included in the staff report, as an appendix or an exhibit, the statement of overriding consideration made by the Board of Supervisors on November 9th for your review. Now, as it's in the coastal zone, it needs to comply with our local coastal program at the airport, which is kind of a mixed bag. The local coastal program encourages the continual operation of flood control activities because of the sediment issue. However, other aspects such as temporary impacts to native habitat for endangered species is discouraged, obviously. And the Carneros Creek Basin is technically in the airport industrial zone, and there is no specific statement as to whether or not flood control operations are permissible in that zone. However, the zone does give Planning Commission discretion to deem it acceptable. The Tecolotido Creek Basin is in the Goleta Slough Reserve Zone, which expressly permits flood control projects or allows flood control projects. So to conclude, the project would protect life and property in the Goleta Valley. The environmental impacts have been mitigated to the maximum extent feasible, and the residual impacts should be weighed against the balance of the project. And staff recommends that you make the findings listed on pages 9 through 12 of the staff report to officially consider the EIR as a responsible agency, make the statements of overriding consideration, and approve both a coastal development permit and a Goleta Slough CDP for the project. Now, I will be happy to take questions. We also have Seth Shank and Maureen Spencer from County Flood Control available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dumont. Are there any questions on behalf of the Commission? Ms. Lodge, would you like to start?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I understood what you said, Mr. Vermond, the process of removal of these sediments can do harm to the Tidewater goby, but the results with the sediment removed makes an ideal habitat. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lodge, that is correct. The impact of sedimentation is on the Goleta Slough degrades Tidewater goby habitat. As when it fills, the goby can't thrive there, and it does tend to occupy the sediment basins following dredging in large numbers. So while it is a significant impact, there does seem to be a benefit as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this process comes around for permit review and then conditions from the city every 10 years?
Commissioner Jordan, that's correct. It's every 10 years, which roughly coincides with when the county updates their environmental impact report for the management plan.
So in the last decade then, is there examples of types of significant or material complaints that you've received that you could talk about or none?
The only complaint that comes to mind, and perhaps Flood Control can speak to this more completely, is that the dredging operation tends to impact the plants that are on the banks of the creek, which are a habitat restoration site as mitigation for the airfield safety projects, which is an expense that's incurred by the airport department to either replace those plants or to clean them up.
So
it's a relatively minor complaint, but that's the only one that I'm aware of.
my point would be that the complaints that you've noticed up until this time have been answered. There aren't really complaints that are out there that people continually complain about the site of the dredging equipment or the trucks rolling down the street. It's been a pretty easy project to live with.
Commissioner Jordan, to my knowledge, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I have a couple, Mr. Vermont. Now this, and maybe this is for flood control, but this project is very similar to the activities that are going on just off Ward Memorial along, is it San Pedro Creek, where you've got that heavy equipment that's dredging and putting the spoils on the bank and then either taking them away or building up the side bank there. Is that pretty much what has been going on and what this project entails?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is part of that same project that we do in San Pedro Creek.
Okay. And in your dealings with Fish and Wildlife Service, this is what an incidental take permit because of the biological opinion. Do they have any concerns, or is this just pretty much a straightforward ongoing maintenance issue, which is just part of doing business in an urbanized area where you've got sedimentation?
Mr. Chair, we do have an incidental take permit. We do, however, before we go into these basins, we do, however, have people that come in and we seine and we take gobies out of there and relocate them. We only do one side at a time, so we usually relocate it to the other basin and get them out of there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to open up the public portion for any public comments that we will be hearing today. Okay, our first and only speaker is Courtney Siepel. And if you could keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. I'm Courtney Siepel. I'm vice president with the Tobes Group. We are the owners of the property immediately north inland of Hollister. You'll see a wetlands that was part of our projects, if I had a pointer, the dark which we call the Willow Springs Wetlands. I was a project manager beginning on this project about 9 years ago, and part of our entitlements at that time, I think everybody knows where it is, but at that time, part of our requirements were the restoration of the Willow Springs Wetlands, which is now operating quite well, has been recognized by the city of Goleta. It was originally approved in the county, and then continuing approval in the city of Goleta at that time. And it's been recognized as a thriving, good example of a restored wetlands. That wetlands drains and could better perform if this sediment on the other side, the south side, the coastal side of Hollister, was dredged. It's a continuing maintenance problem where the neighbor upstream. We've noticed over the years, as part of the flooding, is that we also went through the city of Santa Barbara to get the entitlements to build the Willow Springs apartments, that there's a bus stop right there. And so you have a situation when we get heavy rains, the Willow Springs wetlands performs, but because of the backup across Hollister, you'll get flooding there at a bus stop. People get splashed. Cars go through. I've not personally seen any accidents, but have been told that there could be a lot of potential for accidents, cars, because they do go quite fast. The city of Goleta, and on this side, the city of Santa Barbara, as you know, but have done a good job in trying to post it. My point being that we're in favor of the continuing dredging, have no objections as a neighbor and owner of part of that ecosystem there, that this maintenance be approved and continued. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other members of the public coming up, I'd like to close the public portion of the hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion, comments, and an action. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bermond, can you clarify whether or not within the conditions of approval there's a condition that precludes simultaneous dredging in the two basins? We heard that the intent was to do one at a time to minimize the impact of the Tidewater Goby, but is that built into the conditions of approval that we have before us?
Commissioner Bartlett, there is no condition that requires that in emergency situations. In recent examples, following the Gap Fire, they have staged to do simultaneous dredging, and that's a possible future scenario, although it's not anticipated as part of the project. That hasn't been forbidden. Commissioner Bartlett, I stand corrected. We do have a condition. Okay. It's a mitigation measure in the EIR.
Okay. So that is in there.
That is incorporated into the conditions. Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Okay, I have a couple of comments. I've taken a look at the findings and the overriding considerations, and those related to the Goleta Slough CDP, and there's two comments in here. The first one is number 8, which says there is no less environmentally damaging alternative to the proposed development. All feasible mitigation measures, would have been accommodated, and I think that really says it all about this project. It's pretty standard, pretty straightforward, and so I see this as what I'd call a green light project. So. If there's any other comments or questions, Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to agree with you on that, and the fact that we're using that sediment, only trucking it 5 miles, and it's being used for the foothill landfill restoration, I think is a real positive use of that dredged material. So that's all good.
Okay. Ms. Lodge? Would you like to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Move us forward on this?
I agree with the comments that have been made. It's a project that, well, as pointed out, it could have some negative impacts, but the end result is a very beneficial one. And all the impacts have been mitigated as much as possible. So I would move to approve the project and making the findings outlined in Section 9 of the staff report, and subject to the conditions of approval in Exhibit A, and grant the coastal development permit.
I'll second.
Ms. Larson, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries 5-0. I believe this is appealable to the City Council within 10 days.
Just Chair, that's
But
correct.
as far as we're concerned, you have a project. Thank you very much. Our next item is an application for the property located at 415 Allen Road. Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Commission, the project is located at 415 Allen Road, and it can be found one lot due north of Cliff Drive. Give you a little background. The existing site is developed with a residence. It is 1.37 acres in size. Under the A1 zone district, it is non-conforming because of the slope on the lot. Minimum lot area is required to be 1.5 acre. The general plan designation is residential at 1 unit per acre, so the parcel is conforming as to general plan and local coastal plan. A bit more background on June of 2009, your commission had denied a vote of 3-2 an initiation of the general plan and local coastal plan amendment request for the project. That decision was appealed to council, and on November of 2009, the council upheld the appeal and initiated the general plan and local coastal plan amendment. So in 2010, the application was submitted. And for today, the required approvals will include for your commission a tentative subdivision map, a lot area for proposed parcel A, a coastal development permit, and when we return to council, they'll be considering a general plan amendment, a local coastal plan amendment, and a zoning map amendment, all for parcel B. So the proposed subdivision would take a 1.37 acre lot and divide into two. We have one vacant lot at 14,601 square foot. That lot would include a development restriction, and we have a 1.03 acre lot that we developed with the existing house. So for parcel A, modification will be necessary. A required 1.5 acre for the lot, and as proposed, 1.03 acre. Staff had recommended support of that modification based on the fact it's currently developed. The house is about 75% of the required FAR, or actually by guideline is the FAR, and is similar in size to surrounding parcels, actually a little bit bigger than similar parcels to east of the site. And on parcel B, a development restriction is proposed. And what that would entail is a 2,000 square foot resident, a 500 square foot garage, and capped at a single story only. And what's shown in the slide here is a 40-foot contour line. So we've written a condition that no development would go beyond that line. Now, what the applicant did provide me was a proposed conceptual development plan just to show that they could fit it on a site. Now, obviously, it's crossing the line a little bit over here, but it would go back to the single-family design board, and they could redesign it a little bit to maybe have more development on the south side and still be able to fit within that envelope. And over here is the proposed parcel line, and below is Allen Road. So in terms of the rezone, parcel B would be the one that would be rezoned, and it would be a E3 zone, and in the coastal zone. And it is abuts on the north and the west, the Braemar Ranch track, and that is also E3. So it would tie into that subdivision. And this gives you a little view of the of parcel B that's subject to rezone. As you can see to the north, we have a more of a typical subdivision of two-story and single-story homes. What I show in the solid white line is approximately the proposed lot line. And then dashed line, I'm showing approximately where the building envelope line of the 40-foot contour will be located. So, after your commission considers this project, we would go back to council, and they would consider the action of a general plan amendment, taking parcel B from a residential 1 unit per acre to residential at there was a type of, I think, 3 units per acre. The zone changes will be A1 to A3 in the coastal zone, and a local coastal plan amendment to accept the zone change. Before I turn it back to you, we did revise some of the conditions. Mainly it's about taking care of some typos. One thing we found was we have post-development at 30% land development team recovery fee that's normally charged with projects. And what we found was that given the amount of fees that have been charged to date, staff hours have been recovered and will continue to be recovered after we go to City Council. So what we did was we deleted A2, condition A2 that refers to the land development recovery fee, and then the rest deal with reference numbers were a little bit off, and so we fixed those. And the inclusionary fee for parcel B was updated to reflect $15,500, and we also removed the land development recovery fee in condition G3. So as part of the action,
Chair Justice, you have you were distributed a revised conditions of approval document.
Okay. So as part of the action today, staff recommends that you provide a recommendation to council for a general plan amendment, the local coastal plan amendment for parcel B, zoning map amendment also for parcel B, And the action for your commission today that we recommend is contingent upon the approval of council, a lot area modification to allow proposed parcel A be less than the required lot size of 1.5 acre. Tentative subdivision map to allow the division of one lot into two parcels. Coastal development permit for the development within non-appealable jurisdiction of the coastal zone. And that concludes my presentation. I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. What I'd like to do now is offer the applicant an opportunity to address the commission. And then after we hear from the applicant or applicant's team, I'll entertain questions from the commission. And then we'll open up the public portion. Mr. Americana.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. I have copies of our PowerPoint for the commission and for staff. Have enough? Okay. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, first on the issue of time, as I understand it, the Commission's practice is to allow the applicant 15 minutes total for the presentation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. What I'd like to do is to use 8 to 10 minutes of that time and then reserve 5 for rebuttal at the end of the public hearing in case there is anything that comes out from that we think requires some additional information for the Commission.
That'd be fine.
Okay, great. My name is Steve Americana. I'm representing the Seabolds, Mr. and Mrs. Seabold, who have owned this property for many, many years. And we have a PowerPoint presentation which I'd like to walk through. Some of this will covers the same information that your staff covered, but we'll try not to duplicate it too much. So this is the neighborhood. As you can see, the property in question is in red. The Braemar tract is in the brighter yellow color. And the area closer to the ocean and further west is in the paler yellow color. Go ahead. This is the... could I borrow your pointer, please? Thanks so much. That's mine. What do you push? Right there. Oh, got it. All right. So this is the Seabold's present house down here at the southerly end of the property. This is the parcel that they propose to create. This would be parcel B. All right. This is an aerial photograph showing you the property. This is the Seabold house here. This is the yard. This is the area in which the new home would be built after the lot split. And this is a photo sim of what the house would look like. It's single story, 2,000 square feet with a 500-foot garage. And what we think this can show you graphically is that the house fits in very nicely with the prevailing development pattern in the neighborhood. We would suggest 5 reasons for approving the project. First, that it creates parcels that are compatible with the neighborhood. Second, that it's consistent with good housing policy because it encourages small-scale infill. Third, it's good planning policy to encourage infill where services already exist. Fourth, there are no negative impacts or changes to the neighborhood character. And fifth, it's supported by the neighborhood. Now we'll go into each of those in a little more detail. These are some numbers. This is the proposed parcel A would be 45,000, a little more than 45,000 square feet, a little bit more than an acre. The 4 other parcels that were in the same subdivision created some years ago are this size, 47,200. So it is very close to the prevailing parcel size. For proposed parcel B, 14,601 square feet. The neighborhood, including Braemar, Allen Road, and the 3 Cliff Drive parcels, are 13,970. So you can see the parcel size is consistent with the parcels in the neighborhood. Likewise, the floor area ratio of both the existing home and the proposed home are consistent. This is proposed parcel A is the house where the Seabolds have their is the parcel where they have their house now. The 4 other parcels in the same subdivision, as you can see, the FAR is the same. For proposed parcel B, again, assuming a 2,000 square foot home and garage, the FAR will be the same, 0.17. We think that it's good housing policy that we think that Santa Barbara for many years has encouraged small-scale infill rather than relying only on concentrated larger-scale development, and we think that the recent discussions over future housing policy have emphasized that point. We have in the housing element right now, goal number 3, protecting existing neighborhood character while encouraging compatible infill development. We believe this satisfies that standard of compatible infill development. Housing Authority goal number 5, where appropriate and legally possible, reduce or remove governmental constraints to the maintenance, improvement, and development of housing. The community still needs housing. We need it very badly. The problem, the dilemma we have is where to put it in a place that does not create other kinds of impacts or changes the essential character of the neighborhood. We think this kind of small infill project satisfies that standard. And then finally, we have Housing Element Implementation Strategy 4.1.10, support the development of infill residential projects in the city. We think it's good planning. The site is already served by all major utilities and is located near a bus stop and bike paths with direct access to services, which we can show you. You can see this is the public transit. Here's the project site. Here are the major bus lines that serve a bus stop, which is just a half a block from the project site. And this other graphic shows you the designated bike routes. The project is immediately adjacent to a designated and well-traveled bicycle route. The lot area modification, we believe, is consistent with city policy. As the PC staff report says, the purpose of the slope density ordinance is to provide more options to locate development on a lot to minimize grading and visual impacts. The modification would apply to the existing parcel on which the house already exists. There is already a house there, and so the purposes of the lot of the slope density ordinance would not be in any fashion compromised by allowing this modification to occur. Parcel A is already developed, so no grading impacts would result. That parcel remains unchanged. And that's why the modification for Parcel A, it will result in no change on the ground, and we think it is consistent with the city's modification policy. The project, this small lot, this small house, will have no impacts on the neighborhood. There are limitations on the size of the house and the height of the house, 2,000 square feet, single story, and that'll ensure that it fits into the neighborhood. And the surrounding streets can accommodate one additional home, we believe. There are no significant effects on the environment. We think that the staff report reflects each of these points. Since it's already a developed lot, it's already been basically graded. No future excessive grading will occur. There is no native vegetation that needs to be protected. It's over 200 feet from Arroyo Burro Creek and riparian areas. The soils are suitable. There are no archaeological resources. There are existing public services, and the streets can handle it. So that there's a reason why this project has not gone through any kind of environmental review. There are no environmental issues relating to this one small lot and small house. We believe we have support from the neighbors. I'm going to ask Mr. Seabold to talk to you about that in a moment. From his conversations, they recognize that a small home can fit in here with appropriate restrictions. As I said, 2,000 square feet, one story, staying away from the steepest portions of the lot, and it's going to be a sustainable, energy-efficient home. Mr. Seabold has been the one talking to the neighbors. I'm going to let him talk to you, address you now about his conversations with them and the results of those conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, City Council. We bought this house in '99, and it was lived in by a recluse, and it was a mess, to put it kindly. The weeds in the place had grown up over 6 feet tall. We made the house livable. We made it great for the neighborhood. We added a second story. And we've been working with the city on this project for over 3 years now. And during that whole time, I've kept all the neighbors up to date. Most of them are fully aware of what the plans are. The lot is now staked out and marked, and I've had numerous discussions with them. The other thing that I was planning to do, and the city planning has already done it for me, which is to limit it to a single-story house, so it can't be built later to a two-story house. The other thing that I want to do is I want to make this a model for the community. We added solar panels to our house. I intend to build this as solar from the day one. I intend to use green materials. And since my profession is electronics, it will be probably the most automated house in the city of Santa Barbara when we're done. So I'm asking the city to move forward with this. You can see the map. All the surrounding neighbors, with the exception of one, have given their concurrence and are fully supportive of this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before I reach my conclusion, there's one additional point I wanted to raise. There's a condition of approval proposed in the staff report. It's on page 2, condition D4. It would require that the Seabolts pay an inclusionary housing fee of $15,500. We've looked at the inclusionary housing ordinance and we've discussed it with your city attorney. We disagree that this kind of a project, which creates one new unit, falls within the ambit of the inclusionary housing ordinance. With the that ordinance was amended I think 3 years ago, to apply to projects that are under 10 units, but it's more than one unit. And the question is whether or not this is a project with more than one unit in it. We think it's not. We think this is a project that would create one unit. As staff, both your planning staff and the city attorney have interpreted it, they believe that since the result will be to have two houses on the property, that creates 2 units, and therefore the ordinance applies. That's a disagreement about the legal impact of the ordinance, but I have an obligation to raise it here before you because this is you're the decision makers on that aspect of it, and so I would ask that you drop condition D4 from the conditions of approval on the grounds that the inclusionary housing ordinance should not be applied to this project. And with that, we would ask, and this is our conclusion, that you approve the tentative parcel map, the lot area modification, and the CDP, and that you recommend approval to the City Council of the General Plan Amendment, the LCP Amendment, and the Zoning Map Amendment. And with that, we're finished with our presentation. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Connor. Questions of the applicant at this point? Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Seabolt. On the map showing neighborhood support, there's one person who said no. Is that the same person that we received a letter from someone objecting because he or she was concerned that there might be more than one house on this lot? Is that the same person?
Originally, there was some confusion, all right?
Okay.
The way we brought it to the city the first time, the wording scared the neighbors because they thought we would build multiple houses. So we've been working very hard to make it very clear, and in the documents that I sent out and the documents the city sent out, it was very clear that this is one house. The person who has objected is directly across the street, moved in after the project was well underway, and I think they expressed their concerns in a letter.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to open up the... I'm sorry, Mr. Jordan.
If I could ask a question of Mr. Mayor Connor. I'm confused. It's not a surprise. Your argument on one of the PowerPoints for the lot area modification on slope density. Now, my understanding of slope density requirements is we put a burden on a greater square footage of a lot when it's on a particular size slope for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them that you list there and that's to provide more options. Others are for visual aesthetics, so that the more of the hillside is available. And see if I'm paraphrasing what you said is correctly. So the original slope led to the original sizing of the house, sizing of the house and the placement of the lot based on that size lot. And now that the house is there, you're making the argument that we should be able to come back and take away some of that square footage and apply it somewhere else? Kind of backwards walking into that?
No. We think the slope density ordinance doesn't apply very well in this kind of a situation in the first place.
I'd appreciate that because it's not much of a slope.
Well, no, that's not the reason.
Okay.
The reason is that the slope density ordinance is meant to control the size of houses that go on parcels by having the parcels be bigger if they're on slopes, all right? This house predates the slope density ordinance, and the lot, predates the slope density ordinance. It's non-conforming because you couldn't create it today. If you were doing a new subdivision out there, you could not, if you were doing a new subdivision on vacant land, you could not create a parcel of this size consistent with the slope density ordinance and build a house on it because the slope density ordinance is meant to control the building of homes. This house is already there. It's not going to change. It's not going to get any bigger. It's not going to cause any more grading on the parcel. And so the purposes of the slope density ordinance in this situation have already been satisfied by the way the lot was created and the house that has already been built on it. And there's no further purpose to be gained by saying that you have to still apply it to that lot even though you're not going to build on it.
Except that you want some of that square footage back.
What we want to do is to take a portion of the property which is flat, relatively flat,
right,
and some distance from this parcel, and allow a new house to be built there. That the benefits of having a new lot and one new house outweigh whatever the theoretical benefits might be of continuing to apply slope density to a parcel that's already built on.
Okay.
And that's why we need a modification. That's why the rule applies. Clearly, it's inconsistent with the slope density ordinance. We understand that. But we think it's an inconsistency without any practical effect.
Okay.
Versus building one house, which does have a practical effect.
Thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question for Mr. Merrick Connor. Is there anything different about today's application compared to when you were here last June? I mean,
No.
it looks the same to me.
It's the same.
Okay.
We were here seeking the Commission's input on the initiation of the general plan amendment and the zoning. Sorry.
We made the lot a little bit larger, and we went from 5 units per acre to 3 units per acre.
Okay. I've been corrected. This is Patsy Stadelman, our land use planner, who actually knows a lot more about all of this than I do. So I'm going to ask Patsy to answer your question.
Great.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. To answer your question, when we were here last, we had proposed a general plan land use designation density for parcel B of 5 units per acre. There was a discussion of whether 3 units per acre may be more appropriate, and in consultation with staff, after that hearing and the appeal to the City Council, we did agree that it would be more appropriate to designate it as 3 units per acre, so that's what we've proposed. We adjusted the lot size of parcel B slightly. It's a little bit bigger to meet the requirements for 3 units per acre.
Great, that helps. And question for staff. We didn't have the benefit of our prior minutes in our staff report, and I believe we did not support the application last time by a vote of 3-2. Can you refresh our memories as to, perhaps who was in support or who was against the project? I'm just trying to remember our discussion since nothing really has changed about the application. Do you?
Okay, let's go one at a time here. Ms. Larson, did you have something to
I
add
did
to
not
this?
vote for the project at that time. I remember clearly.
Ms. Lodge?
Mr. Chair, I did not either, and my reason for not voting for it was that it seemed that what was being expanded to change the zoning and extend the existing zoning north of this project, which there seemed to be pretty much consensus was a mistake in the first place, in that it was too dense for the terrain, or at least that was my thinking. And so what has changed is that the city council decided that it's okay.
Okay, well, that helps, I think, preface our conversation when we get there. Thank you.
And Mr. Bartlett, my reasoning was essentially the same as Ms. Lodge's. Okay. Further questions for staff? Yes, Mr. Jordan.
Did you want to do staff now or public comment? I thought you were going in that direction.
Let's go to public comment now and then come back and ask questions of staff. At this point in time, I'd like to open up the public comment portion on this item on our agenda. I have one speaker slip from Julie Bowden, an Allen Road resident. If you could come up to the podium and you could take up to about 3 minutes, would be great.
Great. My grandson corrected you. It's Bowden.
Bowden, I'm sorry.
My husband and I live right across the street at 430 Allen Road with my 91-year-old mother, and I've written my notes out. I'm sorry I missed the presentation. Our front picture windows look out directly from the dining room and the living room onto the area that's under consideration, the grassy slope. And we bought because it was really nice to have the space in front, the space in back. And we knew that the Planning Commission had denied requests before to develop, so that was one of our points in buying. But now we understand the Planning Commission decision has been reversed, and that Mr. Siebold wants to build a single-family, single-story home with a garage that's going to be about 2,500 feet. We love it the way it is, and we don't want the construction and the noise. It's a fairly busy street because of the proximity to the beach. But if this council does approve the development, what we would request is that the building structure be moved downward toward Hendry's Beach and toward the existing structure, maybe 15 feet or so, and then built back into the hillside so that it doesn't cover that whole lot front onto Allen Road. And that would leave the maximum possible green on Allen Road and preserve our views, which we would very much appreciate.
Thank you very much.
You. Questions?
No. Thank you. Okay, at this point, seeing no other folks coming forward, I'm going to close the public portion of this particular hearing, bring it back to the commission for, let's start with questions. Any questions for staff? Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess let me just roll through these and make sure I understand. But the Lot B, if that was to get through this process, and I think when you look at the pictures, the answer is pretty obvious. But the limitation on there would be a 2,000 square foot house, and that's it for the future, now and forever.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, 2,000 square foot house, what's going to be recorded will be a 2,000 square foot single family residence, a 500 square foot garage, and a single story, and not beyond the 40-foot contour line.
And so somebody comes back in 10 years and wants to do a second story addition. Is that possible?
If they come back for recorded map modification to the commission.
So there is a way to possibly do that.
There's always a way, but they would have to come back to the full commission, ask for that restriction to be taken off.
Okay, and then probably you're going to give me the same answer on Lot A, in that the action we'd look at here today would state that it would retain the existing house as it is, no future houses or lot splits envisioned on Lot A unless somebody came back and went through the same steps again, correct?
In part, but someone could come in and buy that parcel and demolish the house, rebuild it. So the house itself currently is not locked in. I mean, they could come back, go to single-family design board, build whatever the current ordinance, FAR, all those requirements.
And then I had one question on the conditions under D3, which was the only part of the condition that really had a requirement for the applicant to do something in the public right-of-way, and that was the sidewalk improvements. And could you explain to me how, if this was approved, what the timeline or the responsibility would be for that? In particular, what I'm looking for is how the project would get approved, but those improvements wouldn't be made up front for whatever reason while a project languished, that those would be front-loaded, that they'd have to occur relatively soon.
The main purpose of that condition is that let me back up. The sidewalk itself right now is adequate. It's not damaged. However, if the applicant comes back right now to pull a sewer line in, which I believe they might have to do as part of the map, then they would basically have to make the sidewalk back to its present condition. So the purpose of that is really to deal with any development, whether it be right now for a utility line or subsequent development of a house.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, the standard practice in a tentative map is that the conditions come down on the tentative map to do the public improvements. There are two ways those improvements, or the timing, there are two different timings for those improvements. The applicant can construct those public improvements prior to submitting for their final map, or in this case a parcel map, and then get their parcel map. The other way is that they can contract with the city as a condition of the approval of the parcel map to construct those improvements. And those contracts with the city typically have the improvements being made within 1 year of the parcel map being approved.
Okay, thank you. That's more like Conditions 101 I was looking for. And then there's several trees in the parkway that are actually have plaques on them, I think, from Santa Barbara Beautiful. And I don't really know where that house would end up, but how would we ensure that if the project moved forward that those trees would be protected or relocated appropriately?
Any trees that, you're talking about trees within the parkway?
Yep.
Okay.
And they're actually plaqued trees. There's a
Right.
plaque in the ground. They were put there, I think, by Santa Barbara Beautiful.
Okay. So those are within the public right-of-way or the front yard, and that would end up before the street tree committee. Is, I believe, the process. For any development that may propose to remove them, that would first have to get vetted through that committee.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions from the Commission? Yes, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask staff if we could discuss that condition D4 about the inclusionary housing fee. I wanted to try and understand how staff came up with the idea of the in lieu fee when one unit is being created. It just seems contrary, at least to my recollection of the inclusionary housing ordinance, so I wanted to hear the city's perspective on that.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, the inclusionary housing ordinance was amended in 2008 to go down to bring the threshold from a prior threshold of 10 units or more down to basically 2 units or more. And the 2 unit is a recognition of the fact that the inclusionary housing ordinance is applied to projects that are creating ownership units, units that can be sold separately from one another. So what you're seeing them are in various types of subdivisions or condominium conversions. What the disagreement comes down to is the fact that the city used the term construct to refer to a project that creates 2 units. And the applicant's argument here is they're only constructing, in another sense of the word, 1 unit. It is a semantical difference in how we're looking at the use of the language in the ordinance. The ordinance has been applied in the same manner of using the word construct to essentially mean create units. The key point from my interpretation and how the consistency of the application of the inclusionary housing ordinance is the fact that we use that term construct to even apply to condominium conversions, which, as this commission knows, can actually occur with absolutely no construction on the ground. You can take, as long as the apartment project was built to condominium standards, you can turn around and apply for a tentative map to subdivide that building with no on-the-ground improvements and construct, in the way that the inclusionary housing ordinance uses the term, several ownership units, condominium units. And so while it is what it is, that we have differing opinions as to how this ordinance should be applied to this project, what this project is in my mind and in staff's application of the ordinance is that this is creating 2 ownership units. The application of the small project exemption for one of those units has been applied to this project, and that is why you're seeing only 1 5% inclusionary fee being charged to the 2 ownership units that are created by this application.
But the existing unit is an ownership unit. It's not like we're taking a rental unit and converting it to ownership, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Bartlett just answered my question. Mr. Vincent, on the example of condos, part of the whole language of the inclusionary housing fee was specifically directed at the conversion of apartments into condos and taking that housing stock out of existence, basically, right?
Yes.
Okay. And in this particular case, obviously, one might say one could use the word we're penalizing somebody for bringing another housing unit on the market. That could be one interpretation.
That could be someone's interpretation.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I misunderstood my understanding.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Just one question first, Mr. Lawson. Now, this project is a categorical exemption, which seems to match it, but I wasn't sure how we got to this particular categorical exemption. Is it statutory? Is it categorical? I know we ran into problems before on a project on Meigs Road, and maybe the law has changed. It doesn't seem like this is the kind of project to bring out the heavy guns because it's so straightforward. But I'm just curious as whether you can do a categorical exemption with a general plan amendment still attached to a project.
Chair Justice Melissa Hetrick, environmental analyst. You are right in one sense. Categorical exemption does not apply to this project as it's defined in CEQA. There are 4 different ways that a project can be exempt from CEQA. So it can either meet a categorical exemption category, which this project does not because it includes a general plan amendment.
Okay.
It can be exempt through what's called a statutory exemption. It can also be exempt if you're denying it. You don't need to do further environmental review if you're denying a project. And then there is a 4th exemption category that is called the common sense exemption. I'm just going to read it.
Great.
It reads that a project can be exempt from CEQA if the activity is covered by the general rule that CEQA applies only to projects which have the potential for causing a significant effect on the environment. Where it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the activity in question may have a significant effect on the environment, the activity is not subject to CEQA. So the staff recommendation in the staff report is basically making that finding that we have run the MEA on this property, gone out there and looked at all the issues, and have found that there is not a potential for significant effect to the environment from the project, and so are therefore recommending exemption under that 4th category.
Common sense?
The common sense exemption.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, why don't we get to the nuts and bolts of this and entertain comments by the commissioners.
Mr. Chair, before you do,
Yes.
if I could just offer a comment using a little bit of my rebuttal time. In response to the question from Commissioner Jordan, Mr. Siebold is prepared to include a deed restriction on Parcel B that would limit the development to the size of the house that is authorized today. Your staff has indicated that any change would require city permits and city approvals, and we understand that. But if it is of greater assurance or comfort to both the Commission and the neighborhood, he's prepared to offer a deed restriction to be sure that any future buyer of the property knows that they can't change it.
Thank you. All right. Back to the commission. Who would like to start? Mr. Jordan, lead away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just have another question. And what would be the chances on the same on Lot A? A deed restriction restricting future development to what's there already.
There are two problems with doing that on Lot A. Number one, any other property owner in the city who has a parcel subject to the slope density ordinance has no limitation on what they can build in terms of the house. The slope density ordinance governs the size of the lot, not the size of the house. And so he would end up being subject to a restriction that doesn't apply to anybody else with a similar kind of parcel. Number two, he would like to build a garage. He has plans and hopes to build a garage on his property. And so it would be impossible to do that.
I'm taking that as a no, right?
A respectful.
Thank you. Okay.
No.
Well, I'm going to ponder on that for a moment, Mr. Chair. I'll see if anybody else wants to start.
Okay. Mr. Bartlett, you want to start?
Sure. Okay, well, I liked what was being proposed last June. What is being proposed today is virtually the same, other than the applicant agreeing with planning staff on the direction of Plan Santa Barbara and the proposed, rezone that would come about as a result of Plan Santa Barbara had that been applied. So I think what we see here is the incremental application of Plan Santa Barbara on a parcel-by-parcel basis because Plan Santa Barbara is stuck. So I see this project totally in conformance with where this commission wanted to go and to try and bring consistency to the zoning ordinance and the general plan, and I would be in support of what is being proposed, and I do not agree with condition D4, and I would not want to support that condition as worded. I see only the creation of one additional market unit being created, and that would be my position. I'd be curious to hear what others have to say on that.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Don't everybody step forward here. Mr. Jordan, have you pondered enough to be able to?
I guess if everybody wants to ponder some more. I'm hoping it's 2 years ago and I wasn't missing this last June. So thank you. So I don't either that or I was asleep somewhere. I would share the same views as Mr. Bartlett with a couple concerns, and specifically, if we have the ability to delete condition D4, I think, in my opinion, that's a penalty that should not be enforced. And I also appreciate and would accept the deed restriction on Lot B. And I also like where the how. I mean, as always, your firm has done a great job on handing us out information to look at. I like where the house is situated, because it continues to offer the neighborhood the greatest amount of open space still available. If we were start to worry about whose window had what view to that open space and scooted over, I don't think the impact would be the same with the open space. Now, I caveat all that with what the heck's going to happen on Lot A in the future, and so that's a concern to me, because I'm already uncomfortable with the talk back and forth on slope density and something's there already and now we should give back square footage. I think the square footage that's open there should should to that extent remain. But I think what's being presented basically remedies an aberration. That's clearly a residential lot that's facing Allen Road and not back into Hope Ranch somewhere, and it clearly would match up with the neighborhood in the way you presented it. And so I think other than the concern over what would happen in the future in the open space on Lot A, I could support everything that I've talked about and Mr. Bartlett said, with the addition of the deed restriction on Lot B. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, not seeing any lights on, I'm going to throw out some comments here myself. I separate my comments into comments at the project level and comments at the policy level. And I come to two different conclusions with that discussion. At the project level, it's a very straightforward infill development, as the applicant and the applicant's team has articulated in the presentation that they made. There's no major environmental impacts. The view issues are private view issues, not public view issues. So on its face, this project, if it didn't have the modification associated with it, would be a fairly straightforward project for me to support. When I look at the intention to rezone and grant a modification of the lot area, that's where I begin to have problems. And the reasons I have problems is I recall the slope density ordinance being in place in either 76 or 77 and having an influence on how this ultimate parcel was developed at the beginning. So I have a concern about making the modification to accommodate a lot that, really looking at all the work we've done on Plan Santa Barbara, I went back to the discussion of the Campanile neighborhood in the proposed general plan, and it says existing slope density requirements would also apply to future subdivisions. And it goes on to say that Braemar tract a land use pattern, it's small subdivision development, steep topography, and that's not the kind of thing we want to see repeated. The area is quite steep, and any future standard subdivision must be carefully considered. So I think that the subdivision to make this lot to begin with took advantage of the slope density standards. And to go again for another shot at a modification to the slope density standards doesn't quite sit well with me. So I'm having difficulty making the findings for the modification. Anybody else? Ms. Lodge, would you like to weigh in on this?
Well, simply to concur with your comments. It's been very nicely done to work a way around what have been the city policies. And yes, it does fit in. The new lot is comparable to the existing neighborhood. But the point of the original rezoning was to make it conform to the land and the slope density and all those other issues. So I'm having real trouble with this one.
Ms. Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm a little concerned because, and I've been holding my tongue because since this was appealed, I'm trying to sort out really what we can do. You know, I can say my truth, which is very much the same as it was before, and my concerns, which are just the same as they were before. But the fact that this has gone to City Council and then come back to us says, well, I obviously cannot have what I wanted. If this were being done in a proper way, according to the hillside design guidelines, this house wouldn't be sitting in that spot. Instead, it would have to conform to the hillside design guidelines in the way it addressed that slope. And I think that it's, I need to say this. First of all, neighborhoods do get accustomed to having open space, and that open space is often, it's private property, but we're used to seeing it, and it's a pleasure to the eye. But it doesn't take away the fact that someone's entitled to develop their open space. So I sympathize with you, but there's not much with the neighbor, but there's not much I can do about that, and nor would I, because someone is entitled to build something, they can build it. On the other hand, because of the slope, that's really been the slope density's just been my stumbling block all along on this, and it still is. But I feel like, and maybe, Mr. Chair, you can help me with this, or Mr. Vincent could, or somebody, maybe Danny, somebody could. I feel like since City Council has upheld the appeal of the applicant, that I'm limited in what I can say in terms of what I think is proper for this, because it's going to go back to City Council, and it's going to get its approvals. And I really feel like it's kind of a jip for the PC, because it comes to Planning Commission, and I feel like I'm just here to stamp it and say, okay, move on. And I don't feel that way. I don't feel that that's proper use of what I have to do.
Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Vincent, help me out here.
First, Danny, is this within the Hillside Design Guidelines or within the Hillside Design District? If you could check on that while I answer the rest of the question. What has happened so far is that this applicant came forward with the proposal for the general plan amendment and the zone change. You denied that the last go-around. That was taken to the City Council on appeal by the applicant, and the City Council decided differently with regard to the initiation of the zone change. That, if you recall, this Planning Commission didn't initiate the zone change. And so what Council did in its prior action is simply to initiate the process. So here we are back again. We now have Council having on appeal initiated the general plan amendment, initiated the zoning change, and you are now being asked to comment on those actions, which will ultimately be taken by the City Council. At the same time, we're processing an application, yes, is dependent upon all those actions. However, for procedural efficiency, if you agree with and recommend the general plan amendment, the zoning amendment, and the local coastal plan amendment, you could process the project contingent upon Council agreeing with you ultimately on those three actions, and then the project could be approved ultimately. So to the Commission now is the action of making a recommendation to the City Council on the general plan amendment, the zoning map amendment, and the local coastal plan amendment. Those are the fundamental actions, and I recommend that you start with those actions, because if you can't do those, the project, since the project's dependent upon those, you can't get to the project either. So I recommend that the Commission first figure out whether or not you can support a recommendation of those fundamental actions, and then second, focus on the instant project. They're part and parcel of one another, and so it's hard to completely separate one from the other, but the general plan amendment, zoning amendment, and local coastal plan amendment or program amendment are foundational actions to actually acting on the project-specific applications.
Thank you for that guidance.
Chair Justice?
Yes.
If I could add something to the discussion as well. First of all, it is in the Hillside Design District, Mr. Vincent. And second of all, we don't usually do this because you're not really supposed to. But there is this thing called Plan Santa Barbara that's wending its way through the city process. And part of what Plan Santa Barbara is proposing is to change the general plan designation of this area, both sides of Allen Road from Cliff Drive to, I can't remember the name of that street, but the streets that's at the top of the slide.
Braemar Ranch?
It's Wade Court. To residential 3 units per acre. That's on the books. I don't think that's one of the things that's highly controversial at the council level. But that's a, normally you're really not supposed to consider future potential things for you're supposed to consider the project against the current general plan. But that is something that's a piece of information that I think is important, perhaps.
Okay. So what I'm going to suggest is that we take a straw poll on the recommendation to council to just get a general sense of the commission's feelings about this particular issue first. I want to, I know the applicant did not use up his entire time here, so if you have something you'd like to comment to the commission, now would be the time to do it.
I'm professionally trained not to ignore any time that's allowed to me, so I'm going to take just a half a minute. I think that what Danny just pointed out is something that's important from the point of view of your policy discussion. That as a matter of policy, this commission has already approved the rezoning that we're requesting. And so if you follow your city attorney's advice about look at the policy issue first, then look at the project, it seems to me that the policy issues have largely already been decided either here or at the City Council. The City Council did, in fact, as a matter of policy, say this general plan amendment and rezoning would be okay, and this commission has said the rezoning would be okay. So if you start there and then go to the question of the project, I think it becomes a lot simpler to approve the project, even with the modification that we've asked for. Because the modification that we've asked for is a modification having to do with lot sizes on a lot that already exists. That the parcel that exists today is both fully developed and non-conforming as to the lot, the slope density ordinance. Under that ordinance, it couldn't be created today, but it has been. And now the slope density ordinance has no further effect on that parcel because the slope density ordinance does not control house size. It only controls lot size. It was applied, it's done, it's behind us. But technically speaking, as a matter of the zoning code, the lot is non-conforming, but it's a non-conformity with no practical effect. And that's why I made the point to Commissioner Jordan that we have the opportunity to create a new house. It fits in nicely. Everybody agrees. It fits in beautifully with the neighborhood. But it has this technical problem with a lot, with the slope density ordinance, which no longer applies. Doesn't matter anymore. It has been applied. It's done. It has no further regulatory effect. And so we think if you break it out that way, look at the policy first, which has already been decided, and then look at the project, we think that this project is consistent with that policy that has been decided. All these issues, the size of the lot, all that was discussed here and at the City Council when we came through on the initiation stage of this. We've actually plowed this field before. And we think we're now at the point past the policy. The policy is, in fact, set. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I just had one last question for Mr. Cato when you conclude your telephone conversation. Now, I don't recall having this particular area singled out in our Plan Santa Barbara discussions in terms of maps. I recall the general tenor of the comments were that the single-family zones stayed the way they were.
Chair Justice, that's true for a vast majority of the single-family zone areas of the town. but there were a few areas like this one that there was some conflict between what was there and how its general plan designated. Primarily, I think it's what generated this discussion was the fact that the Braemar tract is zoned E3, but it's got a 1 acre general plan designation, right? So, an attempt to try to figure that out and get those to be consistent, it got extended further south, and I'm just trying to clarify this, but I think it got extended all the way to all parcels on Allen except the one at the corner of Cliff Drive and Allen Road. So, so that's where that came from, and it was not it wasn't a subject of great discussion, you know.
I didn't recall it to be, and so you're reconfirming what staff indicated, which was part of the general plan process, was to bring the land use map of the general plan into compliance with the zoning designation map.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Bartlett, and then we'll see if we can go. Oh, Ms. Larson. Oh, let's start with you.
Well, you know, I really want to go down that slippery slope, but I'm struggling with it. And like, you can't believe, and I really don't want to. You know, but I'm still struggling. So I'm just not going to say much right now. I'm going to struggle in private while you discuss.
Okay, Mr. Bartlett.
Well, I clearly recall those discussions with Plan Santa Barbara, because we had a whole session on the areas of town where the general plan and the zoning ordinance were at conflict with each other, and the whole purpose of that discussion was to try and let Plan Santa Barbara even out those discrepancies so that we don't have to duke it out here at the dais parcel by parcel to implement what should be consistent. So this was one of the areas, and it came up when we reviewed this project in 2009 that the ordinance and the general plan didn't match, and yet the city decided to annex this anyway. I mean, they really acknowledged the density that was on the ground when it was annexed, so in essence they condoned what was there. So I know we've had this discussion, and that was the whole goal of Plan Santa Barbara, and I thought we were all on the same page with that, so I'm a little surprised to be hearing that now we're not in support of what we're in support of. So anyway, on a policy level, I totally agree with what's in front of us, and so I don't have an issue with that, but I guess we'll get to a straw vote soon.
Okay. Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could the applicant put up slide 2? That one, thank you. So, Mr. Cotter, could you indicate on there what's who?
You're asking for which areas would be redesignated?
Yes. What does the general plan say, and where is that general plan boundary, and where does what apparently has been put away?
I understand the question, and I'm going to do this as best I can because it's from a lot from memory. So my understanding is that all this area here has a general plan designation of 1 dwelling unit per acre. Everything that's green plus everything that's yellow here in this whole neighborhood has a general plan designation of residential 1 unit per acre. And most of that has a consistent zoning designation of A1, right? That's what this light green is. The Braemar tract is the yellow area that has the zoning designation of E3, which is actually equivalent to 5 units per acre. I was just on the phone with Betty Weiss, who corrected me, because my recollection of the way this happened is incorrect. This whole area that's in yellow, that's E3, to be consistent between general plan and zoning, the general plan designation would be residential 5 units per acre. But what's being proposed is residential 3 units per acre, and that's primarily because of this project, 415 Allen Road. The staff's thinking behind this is that recommending a change to this whole area to be 3 units an acre, which would allow this particular development, and but no more than what's being proposed here. If it went to a full 5 units per acre, then it could potentially even add another unit on that, I think. That's my understanding. So it's this area here all the way down to the bottom edge of the lot here and across that is proposed to be three units per acre. So I was incorrect.
All that's in yellow plus the red would become
3 units per acre, yeah, plus maybe a couple across the street.
General plan would indicate 3 units per acre.
Correct. And then the plan, what I was told is the plan Santa Barbara in order for part of the implementation strategy would be to make the zoning consistent with that future 3 unit per acre general plan designation. That would be a future implementation strategy if the 3 units per acre was adopted with Plan Santa Barbara.
And this is all because of what's actually on the ground.
Correct.
And so what's before us is whether we want to make this be consistent with what's north of it or not.
Correct. And to reiterate the point, it seems like from a policy standpoint, the recommendation has been made to council already. And Planning Commission did look at that, whether I mean, it wasn't a big item of discussion at the Planning Commission, but it was part of the maps that the Planning Commission looked at before they made a recommendation to City Council on Plan Santa Barbara. So anyway, that is an important point.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to keep on popping up, but something that Danny just said I think is important with regard to the issues raised by at least 2 or 3 of the commissioners about slope density. And if I may just pose a question, if this property, the red property, Mr. Siebel's property, is redesignated at 3 dwelling units per acre, doesn't that cure, and it's rezoned to be consistent with that general plan designation, doesn't that cure the nonconformity?
Chair Justice, it would.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't have the pleasure of sitting through this a couple of years ago, so I know you're going to get to a straw vote, but I'm not really sure what I'm voting on, so I want to ask that question again over Mr. Vincent's suggestion to focus on points A and B. What happens if we recommend not to forward those recommendations to council? Has not council already said that's what they want?
Mr. Chair, what the council did on appeal was to initiate this process. And while there were many positive comments, I recall the council's vote to be fairly similar to this conversation, but they chose to lean on the side of initiating the process and continuing the conversation. It was not, in other words, I don't recall the exact vote. It's possible that the applicant's team may have the exact vote, but the conversation was mixed. But ultimately, they chose to initiate the zone change and the general plan amendment, whereas this commission, while its conversation was mixed and its vote was mixed, fell on the opposite side of those actions. So here we are again. Basically, you can, as far as process is concerned, we're back where an applicant is asking for his own change, and you are tasked with the obligation of making a recommendation to the City Council on whether or not to initiate the zone change. And that's where you are.
Okay. And then my other question would be, I know you tried to unbundle these and get us to focus on the first 2, but and I know for a couple of you at least that the modification in the second group of findings is an issue. But if you agree with the recommendations to council, the modification has to follow, right, by process. It's a cleanup act more than anything else.
With the application before us now, in this manner, yes, the modification is a necessary application at this point. As with this particular application. As you've heard, depending on what happens with Plan Santa Barbara, the issue could become moot. But as we've seen, first you have to have something happen on Plan Santa Barbara.
Okay.
If this application wants to go forward today and wants to go forward to the City Council before there's a decision on Plan Santa Barbara, each of the required applications are necessary.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chair, it seems like we're going in circles, so I guess you got to push towards that straw vote. But it seems like that even people who are in disagreement with this are still in agreement with this somehow, but lingering on an item or two, that they can see it conceptually. We've talked about some of the concepts before last year with Plan Santa Barbara, and once you get past a certain level, it's essentially just cleanup process. So I again would echo Mr. Bartlett's comments that it could move forward and fit in very well with the neighborhood. It would be equivalent to what we've talked about with Plan Santa Barbara. And again, with my only caveat on what might happen in the future on Lot A, and I don't know how to resolve that. So, thank you.
Okay. Well, just my own take on this, having heard this discussion go around the block here a couple of times, I'm still uncomfortable with the general plan amendment, and in particular, singling this parcel out before the general plan update process takes place. We're unable to get anything through the council, and I just don't have I'm not comfortable with making the leap here to do a general plan amendment, given the circumstances that I consider important in this particular case. But I'd like to take a straw poll now to get a sense of the commission before we go on and discuss the findings that would be made, presuming we could get to yes on the recommendation to council. So I'd like to start with the two recommendations: A, the general plan and coastal plan amendment, and the zoning map amendment, and ask the commission whether they are comfortable finding in the affirmative for that recommendation. Mr. Bartlett is in the affirmative. Mr. Jordan is in the affirmative. Ms. Larson? We're not in the affirmative. Ms. Lodge? And I continue to be of the same mind as I was when we saw this last time. So, given that preference, to get more feedback from this, I would go on to the findings for the modification, the tentative map, and the CDP. Now, presuming that a general plan amendment were granted by the council, how does the commission come down on the issue of making the modification of lot area to accommodate the project to be consistent with the zoning and the general plan as changed? Mr. Bartlett, would you like to lead the way, please?
Sure. I can support the findings for the modification for the lot area on Lot A. I find that there's not going to be any physical change to what's there now, so it really has no impact to the neighborhood, and it's literally a paperwork cleanup act to pull this together without holding the applicant hostage for Plan Santa Barbara to occur.
Okay. Ms. Larson?
Well, I need to be consistent with what I'm doing, but when the time comes, and it probably will, but I'll find for the CDP, and at this time, since I can't find for the zone change, it would be inconsistent for me to say that I could approve a tentative map.
Okay. Mr. Jordan.
Well, I think we know which way we would all go in this, and I agree with Mr. Bartlett. I think it's just a cleanup. If you're talking about all three of the A, B, and C, at some point in there, I don't know which one of those, but I would suggest including the restriction on Lot B, and it fits in one of those. I'm not really sure which one. And then at some point, if it got that far, to the deletion of condition D4, and that's what I would support as a package.
Okay. And that's fairly consistent with your perspective on this. Okay, Ms. Lodge, do you have anything to offer?
Well, I would, if the council does go ahead with this, I certainly think that the restriction to one unit, one story, one house, one story, 2,500 square feet, including the garage, should be a condition that stays with the property.
Okay.
And I would side with staff on the inclusionary fee.
Okay. As far as my perspective, I would be able to find for the tentative map and the coastal development permit, but I could not make the findings for the modification because I feel that in the explanation from staff, it says the purpose of the slope density is to provide more options to locate development on a lot to minimize grading and visual impacts. And I believe that purpose was already fulfilled when the original subdivision was approved. So I don't think that's a relevant reasoning to back up the modification, and I think that the appropriate improvement on the lot has already been accomplished. So I couldn't find in favor of the modification, but that's the sticking point for me, and it is because of the what I interpret as the intent of the slope density ordinance. So that's kind of the Commission's general feedback. And Mr. Vincent, I guess the appropriate way to move here is to entertain a formal motion on the first part, which would be the recommendations to council, and then go on to the findings as the second half of that. If I'm trying to give, if there's not a support on the Commission for the project, I'm trying to give the applicant as much richness in the discussion so that if you choose to go forward, the council and you and the public will benefit from the tussle we're having here between project and policy.
Mr. Chair, given the tenor of the conversation from the Planning Commission, I believe a recommendation or a non-recommendation on the first three items of your application would be the most appropriate motion. Because if you don't have a recommendation a positive recommendation on those three items to get to the operative actions for this project, it really is premature. Your comments have been made, and we can make sure that those comments are reflected in your minutes so that the council has the benefit of them when they're considering what are the next steps. But what I anticipate happening if the Commission does not recommend these foundational actions, the council will have an appeal on those actions, and the council will vote up or down on that appeal. If they choose to grant the general plan amendment, the zoning map amendment, and the local coastal program amendment, my guess is that they would then refer this project back to the Planning Commission for an action on the tentative map at that time based on their actions of those foundational actions. So that's the procedure that's the procedure I see happening.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure we don't go around the pole more times than are absolutely necessary here, because
I'm trying to be
been in the process for 3 some odd years, and this is, I'm sure, getting old to them.
I understand that, and I'm trying to be as efficient as in process as well. One of the things that is this commission has now struggled with this issue twice of having both project application and project-specific applications being considered at the same time that foundational actions aren't really finished. And so I'm seeing that we're at a point where we have to get these foundational issues done and then make an action on the tentative map, the modification, and so forth.
So the matter is to the commission for a motion regarding the general plan and coastal plan amendments and the zoning map amendment. Mr. Cato.
Mr. Justice, if I could ask Mr. Vincent, wouldn't it be more efficient for the commission to recommend denial of, deny the tentative map, the modification, and the coastal development permit, recommend not adopting the general plan changes, and then have it be, let the applicants appeal it to council, and then a council could take action on all of it at once instead of referring it back to the commission?
There are lots of ways to be more efficient than the way this project has gone. But at the same time, I think that what you could do, I agree with Mr. Cotto, and what you can do is make your recommendation regarding the foundational actions and then deny each of the project-specific actions based on the fact that you could not make a positive recommendation on the first 3.
Okay.
Chair, I would so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion has been moved and seconded. Mr. Bartlett.
Could we clarify exactly what the motion is then before we call the vote?
My understanding is that the motion from Ms. Lodge, seconded by Ms. Larson, is to not forward a recommendation for adoption of a general plan, coastal plan amendment, and zoning map amendment. And is that in the proper positive versus negative in terms of protocol here? I'm a little rusty.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I
Yes.
believe what Mr. Vincent said was to deny.
Okay. Deny.
Mr. Chair, I mean, let's back up for a second, and the first 3 actions are requiring a recommendation from the Planning Commission. You can make a positive recommendation, in other words, recommending that the council make the action requested in this application, or recommend that the council not make the action that is requested in this application. I believe that, and Ms. Law, the approach that I'm seeing the commission going toward is that the commission does not recommend that the council make the general plan amendment requested in the application. Do not make that the commission does not recommend the local coastal plan amendment, and that the commission does not recommend the zoning map amendment as requested in this application.
So a motion, so a vote in favor of the motion would be a motion to deny the forwarding of these recommendations to the council.
To forward a recommendation that they not make those actions.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, that would be a denial without prejudice? Is that how, or is it just a straight deny, or what?
Mr. Chair, you would be making a recommendation to the City Council.
Okay. Recommendation.
These are actions that are ultimately actually taken by the City Council. The Planning Commission does not make these changes.
So a yes vote is a not recommend, and a no vote is a recommend.
That is correct.
In this particular case. Is everybody clear on that?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Mr. Jordan.
And I just want to clarify, we're only talking about item 8, A and B?
That's correct.
Okay. I keep hearing the word 3 actions.
There's 2 parts of A.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay. Mr. Mayor.
And the motion is going to be not to forward the recommendations.
That's correct.
Okay.
I know Mr. Americano wants to speak to the motion here, so.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I confess to some confusion. Seems to me that the Commission can either make a recommendation to the Council or not make a recommendation to the Council. And within that first choice, make a recommendation, you can recommend a yes vote on the general plan amendment, zone change, and LCP, or you can recommend a no vote on those three items. So you really have three choices. You can make a recommendation, yes or no, or you can not make a recommendation. And I've heard the motion described in both terms. And I'm not, that's my confusion. I don't know if the Commission has before it a motion that it forward a recommendation to the Council that it not adopt the requested policy changes, the LCP, the zone change, and the general plan amendment, or whether you are simply not sending a recommendation at all. I've heard it both ways, and I think it would be useful for the Council to know whether you've decided not to take a position or you've taken a position and you've sent it on to them. That's my question, if I may.
Okay. Mrs. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try again to rephrase it. I move that the Planning Commission vote to not recommend a change in the land use designation or in the zoning map, either the general plan and local. We not recommend the amendments proposed to the general plan and local coastal plan amendments or for the zoning map amendment. Is that any clearer?
It is to me, but Mr. Vincent?
Now it's my turn to be confused. And I appreciate Mr. Americano's highlighting or pointing out the three possibilities. The first decision point is the Commission making a recommendation or not making a recommendation? And unfortunately, the way that Mrs. Lodge just phrased the negative recommendation leads me to wonder, are we talking about a negative recommendation or are we talking about no recommendation at all? And so
my understanding of Ms. Lodge's motion is to recommend that the Council deny the requested general plan, coastal plan amendments, and zoning ordinance amendments.
If I could hear Mrs. Lodge say that, it would really help.
I was hoping that the motion would make it clear that if the motion passes, that the Planning Commission recommends not making these changes to the general plan, not adopting the general plan and local coastal plan amendments or the zoning map amendment. Is that clear?
I am clear now. It's that
Is the Commission
you're both
clear?
making the motion is that not only the Commission is making a recommendation, and that recommendation is that the Council not make the amendments.
Exactly.
Correct.
Thank you.
Is that clear with the seconder?
That's clear with the second.
Okay. Further comments? Let's call the question. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Motion passes 3-2. And this motion is appealable to the City Council within 10 days. Now
you want to take an action on the project-specific applications as well.
That's correct. And we'd like to take those in the order they appear in the staff report for clarity. So I'm looking for a motion on the to adopt the modification of lot area.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'd just like to get clarification on that, because what I heard before in the discussion was that if the recommendations to council that the Commission just did not support, if those were indeed put in place by council, that I heard support for the subsequent findings that would warrant people making that assumption or not making that assumption. So I'm curious as to how the people feel they're going to vote on that based on the recommendations to council, on whether those would be upheld by council or reversed by council, and what would be their subsequent vote.
Okay. The presumption is that council adopts the general plan and zoning amendments, because without those amendments, the applicant does not have a project. And so what I'm looking for now is an affirmative motion on the modification piece.
Mr. Chair, with the project-specific applications, given the action the Commission has just made with not making a recommendation, we're not in a place to consider the application. Now that you've recommended that the foundational actions not occur, and this struggle I'm having explaining this is exactly why I was thinking that it might be clearer to have the foundational actions go to council and get resolved. However, for the sake of efficiency for everyone, my recommendation would be that you simply take an action to deny the project-specific applications because you could not make the recommendations on the foundational, a positive recommendation on the foundational actions, and let City Council handle all of this as on the appeal in one hearing. That was, and so
that's our intent. Yes.
To get into an application by application decision-making matrix, I think it would become more confusing.
Fine.
Mr. Chair, the only confusion I have there is I distinctly heard support for the tentative map and the coastal development permit, but not for the modification. And so to group them all together in a lack of support, I don't think reflects the conversation that took place earlier. I think in my mind, what I heard was really the only sticking point to be argued about was the modification if the foundational recommendations were upheld by council.
Mr. Chair, I used the word consistency because that is how I feel we should be with this. We should be very consistent so the applicant has the best shot and clear at City Council, and the City Council gets the clearest recommendation from us. I don't see how we can approve one thing and then deny another, or vice versa. I think that they go hand in glove with each other. And so I think that it should go to City Council as one, so that they don't have to do additional exercise, and we should be consistent with our direction, and then the City Council can do what they're going to do. And then you come back and whatever the City Council says, we do. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, I would tend to agree with Ms. Larson because without a modification, the project would have to be redesigned or reformulated in some way, shape, or form. That's a new project. That's a new set of decisions, for better or for worse. That's beyond our control and likely beyond the control of the council if it brings it back to us. So I would come back to the approach that Mr. Vincent has suggested, that based upon the recommendation to council for denial of the general plan and zoning amendments, that the remaining permits are not approved. I'm out of practice here.
Well, Mr. Chair, now I'm confused. How can we act one way or another on something when neither possibility, either to approve or disapprove, is possible now that our recommendation is to not adopt any of the amendments?
Does the action we just took moot the other decisions?
Well, we did go through the process of taking a straw vote in order on all 5 parts, where it was obvious that the first 2 were not going to pass, and segments of the remaining 3 were supported by a majority.
Mr. Chair, I think that the best way to handle this, to give what I think everybody wants is the most efficient process at this point. At the same time, to give accurate information to the City Council regarding this Commission's deliberations, my recommendation is that you make one action regarding the project-specific applications, and that we will make sure that the minutes and staff report reflect the discussion and straw votes of the Commission regarding the application, the project-specific applications, the modification, the tentative map, and the coastal development permit, so that they have a clear picture of your discussion. But I think that the cleanest and simplest action to take at this point would be to deny the tentative map, the modification, and the coastal development permit because you were not able to make a positive recommendation regarding the initial foundational actions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would once again so move.
Motion to deny the remaining applications
I'll
from Ms.
second.
Lodge. Second from Ms. Larson. Any further discussion? Mr. Jordan.
Nope, I'm sorry. Lights up.
Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
Abstain? Motion carries 3-2. And this is appealable as a part of the other application to the council in its entirety within 10 days.
Chair Justice, we will make sure that your straw votes and the deliberations are fully described in the staff report.
I think that would be helpful, but to all parties concerned. Okay. Okay, that brings us to our administrative agenda. Is there a report from our staff hearing officer liaison? Ms. Larson, anything to report from the show?
I have a great thing from the show.
Okay.
And actually, I even have a show and tell, so to speak. Now, many of us will remember a landlocked lot that we looked at off of Garden Street some time ago. Well, the neighbors went through a giant process of actually dividing that up and doing a lot line adjustment, and it looks like that on the map. And I was so impressed with that. I still have the map, but this was a terrific effort by neighbors to straighten out something that was really that made no sense at all, and this makes all the sense in the world, and they took care of it, cleaned it up, and surveyed it, and did their due diligence. And at one time there was actually a small residence proposed for that parcel, if we recall. So this is just a great thing, I thought. So that was really good. And you want me just to do the other liaison reports I have?
No, I want to differentiate the show report from the other reports.
Yeah, thanks. So that was a real positive thing, and I saved the map in case anybody wanted to take a look at it and see how it was resolved. You're welcome to have a look at that too. And Ms. Weiss was the staff hearing officer for this, and it went so well. Thanks.
Okay. So you're not seeing any projects at the moment that would be bumped up to the commission for?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now on to committee liaison reports. Ms. Larson, do you have a committee liaison report of
Yes, Mr. Chair.
importance to the commission?
Yes. I went to my first meeting of the Sustainability Committee, which used to be this, into which solid waste was folded. So now it'll meet on a more regular basis. And they are renegotiating the trash hauler contracts at this time. So that's a 1. And the HLC report that meeting was very interesting as well. And the outcome, the item I went for was formerly known as Radio Square. So Radio Square as we knew it is now not happening at all. And they had come in with a proposal to spruce up and fix the roof on. And if you drive by it, you'll see the plastic on the roof of the Caro's restaurant building. And so there's it'll return to HLC. It hasn't been done yet, but they are looking at that building only at this time to paint and upgrade and possibly divide the interior so that they can have it for 2 tenants instead of 1. So that's what's going on with that particular item, and I thought that was very newsworthy for us.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other committee reports?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. Lodge.
Airport Commission. The airport is doing well. They don't have any fiscal issues. Their expenditures are below their receipts, and so they're right on target, and no adjustments are needed. There, in the first 6 months of the fiscal year, which is from the end of June, it's been a 2.76% increase in air passengers. And the passenger count for January was up 3.5% compared to last January. So it's not back to what it was before in 2008, before everything took a downward dive, but certainly going in the right direction. The improvements, the interior improvements continue to be worked on the new terminal. The airport was asked to help with the shell for the restaurant, and they are contributing up to $450,000 for the restaurant shell. They're also going to be working on a new airport master plan. For the public in general, the airport now has its own app for the Droid, and in this month there's to be one for iPhone, which you will be able to track arrivals, departures, status, and parking. More artwork is being commissioned, and there are lots of applicants. I can't wait till this terminal opens. And they have now moved. They had expected that the terminal would be open in the spring, but now, as of February 16th, the date for the grand opening events are the week of June 8th, 9th, and 10th. There'll be a gala, and on the 11th, there'll be a public open house.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Lodge. Anybody else with committee reports? Seeing no additional lights on, we've completed our agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. You're
Yeah.